So welcome, Pamela. Welcome to this Montessori Parenting Conference. I'm very happy to have you with me. I did an interview with you for the blog, and I follow you since you have started your your parenting community where you live, and your infant community when you have parents and children together. So I find your Facebook page very inspiring, so I do check a lot because we offer the same kind of services to parents, so it's very inspiring to following you. And yeah, I'm very honored to have you with me tonight. So welcome here, and I would love you to introduce yourself to all the parents here and tell us who you are.
Well, first, I just want to say how grateful I am to be invited to be here. And to join you in this wonderful parenting conference. I think it's great, and I'm looking forward to all of the presenters. So my name's Pamela Green, and I am a parent of two sons who are grown. They are, one is 32 and one is almost 30. And so I've gone through that early parenting, and I'm at this point in my process. And my boys were, they went to Montessori school, they attended my school. So I had the opportunity to be Montessori parent, as well as be a teacher and then head of school in the school where they went to school. And then later on, my eldest son, Seth, returned to Montessori, and he trained and he taught in a 3 to 6 classroom for 10 years. So I got to be his boss, and I was his boss, and I was also, my two daughter-in-laws also worked at that school. So I was there since about 1981 to about 2013. And another thing I should say is I've been married to my best friend and partner for almost 35 years, and he's consistently been my Montessori assistant throughout all that time. And I have, as you had mentioned, I have a place called Ananda Montessori that's a physical space for its Montessori Parent, Infant, and Child program for parents to attend with their children from pregnancy up through age 6. So different classes depending on their attending. And then the other thing that I do is I'm also a childbirth educator and a birth doula and a home birth assistant midwife, and I've been doing that since 1990.
Wow, that's a lot. As we were discussing before, you are busy and just suppose very passionate about Montessori to want to offer more now that you don't work in the school anymore. And I didn't know about your son being a Montessori teacher as well, and about your daughters-in-law being a Montessori teacher as well. So definitely you have spread the love of Montessori. And yeah, it's quite amazing to hear all of that. And yes, to hear that your children went to school with you. That's something that we have in common as well. My two children attended my Montessori classroom in the early years, and for one it was quite easy. She was very easy with me or without me, and for my son it was another situation. So I'm quite happy that he goes to his own Montessori school because he needed his own space, and it's better for him to grow with another teacher. I think we were not a good fit in the classroom together. And so the question I had for you is, I believe you discovered Montessori when your children were very little, right? Or before you had the children. I don't remember exactly, but I would love to know, how did you discover Montessori?
How I discovered Montessori. I was in college for traditional education. I believe it was elementary. It was way back. I started in 1978. And then in 1981 I went to Penn State. So I was in a theories of education class, and he was my advisor and the head of the education department. And when we're discussing the different types of education, when we got to Montessori, rather than just read about it, he knew of this school that had just opened very recently, and so we all went to visit. And he continued to do that all throughout the year, for the rest of the time that he was at Penn State. So that was in 1981, and I came into this space that I had read maybe a couple paragraphs about Maria Montessori, and I just felt like I had entered into a place that met my understanding of the child and really spoke to the respect that I had always felt for children. And in fact, I didn't see any grown-ups at all. So I began to wonder if there were any there. And the children came out, and it was the whole class, all of our class. So they came out and welcomed us, and where would you like to hang up your coat, and just took care of everything. And it was my first time seeing an environment that was only set up for the children. And then one of the girls took my hand and she said, I want to show you something. And so we went into the classroom, and I just sat with her, and she was showing me some work she was doing. And it took me quite some time to see any adults in the space. And then I finally, we were all down low, and so I finally did see there were 2 adults there, but the room there was a very active energy in it of interest in learning, but it wasn't chaotic. It wasn't. It felt very lively. It felt very like a center for the child, and it just changed my life, because it was as if what I had been knowing from my whole life, I was meeting at that time. And then I had the process of meeting the head of school there, and then his assistant. And at that point, when we got back to the university, I just went to my advisor and I said, this is all I can do. I'm not going to continue with traditional education. And I did start teaching in a Montessori school in South Carolina in 1983 for a few years, but then I became pregnant with Seth, and we moved back up to where we live now, and I've been here for over 40 years. So we came back, and I was still in contact with that school a lot, because one of my closest friends' daughters attended there, so I would drive her there, and I would just I would take her and I would sign her in, and then I would just go get coffee. And the head of school, we became very close friends with everybody, and he gave me the book, The Absorbent Mind, and he said, why don't you just take this? And so I began. That was my beginning of my study. And then I started to observe. I didn't know that that's what I was doing, but I just on my own brought a notebook, and I just would come and sit. And it ended up that was the school that I became head of for over 20 years. So I began to work with him. He was my mentor for a long, long time. I trained, and then when he moved on to public school, I became head of school. And then, so that was my introduction, and it was just a very, you know how you have those moments in your life where this was before and this was after? That was that moment, one of those moments for me.
Yeah. Well, it's a great story, because it's rare that here, at least in the UK, in the training to become a teacher in mainstream education, to become a state teacher. It's just a mention about Montessori, and in many earlier books about child development or early years education, Montessori is just a mention. So yeah, definitely there is work to do to spread the word about Montessori in the mainstream system, in the state education, because that would be, you know, amazing if it could go back there and just be acknowledged, basically. Yeah, but yeah, it's a nice story that you, university teacher, was open to other kind of education and was able to introduce you to Montessori. Brilliant. As you have said as well, and that's one thing that I really wanted to chat with you tonight, because this conference will cover all ages, and with you I really wanted to talk about the babies and the birth preparation, because as you said, you are also a doula, and I know that you offer birth preparation, and obviously you incorporate Montessori into that. So I was very interesting to see how you became interested into birth preparation in going stages, I suppose, because you started first as a 3 to 6, which is the majority of the Montessori teacher are in the 3 to 6 classroom. And so, yeah, you went a bit down in ages and decided to be more about the birth preparation, the mother, and so on. So I was curious about that and about your role as a doula. If you want to tell me a bit more about that.
You know, my birth work actually came before my Montessori work, even before I started. I was in the classroom for a bit in the mid-'80s, but even before that, I had a friend who was pregnant, and she was having a home birth, and it was right around the time that we were getting married. And so I went to her prenatals with her, and I would go, and one of the midwives that helped her is now my midwife partner for home birth. So we've been friends for 35 years, and that was really in the same way. I remember the first time I even put my hand on a pregnant belly to feel the baby, I had the same feeling as when I entered the Montessori classroom, that this was something that I really wanted to be doing. So my introduction into birth was through traditional midwifery, and then as a doula, I was the first a doula. Just to, if someone doesn't know what that is, it's a Greek word, and it really means, the definition means woman servant, but we tend to see it as a woman helping woman. And we could say that it's one of the most ancient works of all time, you know, since birth started happening, the first birth, and then women who had birthed would attend other women. And so that practice is very, very long in time through human history. And a doula, I didn't know, when I started as a doula, I didn't know that there was a name for that. I just went to the hospital, and I helped women with their births. And I also was teaching childbirth education, all of those things since around 1990. And a number of my parents would birth at home, a number would birth at the hospital. A doula is someone that is, you know, because again, it's such an ancient thing, the training, I feel, is really a mentorship. It's an apprenticeship training in its true form. You can go to train, and I'm certified in 2 different doula certification programs, but I had been a doula in the hospital for 10 years before I even decided to do that. And there weren't any other doulas in the area or midwives in the hospitals here. So I would just, I I just kind of created my way based on what I understood from, I attended my first birth in 1986, and so at home, and I birthed at home with Seth, and then just kind of took in what I knew. And what it is in many ways, it's emotional support, it's physical support, it is education, it is relational support. This is the model that I do. And it's also, it's so relational, and it is, to me, the similarities between Montessori and birth in the work that I do are the same, because it's based on the respect of the woman, the respect of the child, the respect of the father or the partner, but especially the woman and the baby, giving them space so that they have their experience, which is not my experience. It is not. We become part of that prepared environment. And so I think it's the same care on myself when I go to a birth as I do as when I enter into Ananda, or I'm doing parenting mentorship, or I'm doing consultation with schools and teachers. That's the same preparation I bring in myself, and understanding that I'm part of that prepared environment. So, and as a doula, you know, if I'm for the hospital, I do usually 2 prenatals at home. So those are visits where we work on birthing preferences or the preparing of the environment, which parents have, depending on where you live, you have different options and choices. So looking at those, and then I'm with them from the birth onwards. We usually begin at home and then go into the hospital. I'm there throughout all of that, and then I do at least 2 postpartum visits. And whether you're breastfeeding or any way that you're feeding, I give support in those ways and all those things. And so that's kind of what a limited definition of what a doula is, but it's very, you know, what I think of it as is similar to Montessori too. You know how in parenting, you can be anywhere, and like there's this thread between us and that person. There's a connection between us. And so if I'm in the hospital, that woman will know that no matter what, I'm there with her. And I'm going to be responsive, and I'm going to enter in, and I'm going to move out, and I have many comfort measures and things that I do, and massage, and all these different things that I offer to assist. But, you know, when you're in the hospital, especially, there are sometimes different people coming in, and to have someone that's been with them, and there's that trust and safety that is created, is very important. And we are mammals, and the same things that we needed from the beginning of time as mammals to birth, we still have those same needs. So that's a big part of the prepared environment as well.
Because that's very interesting, the kind of links you're making between Montessori and the birth preparation, and you know, being part of the prepared environment for that woman who's going to give birth. And I know also that you're offering this kind of preparation for the arrival of the baby in a Montessori way. So I was curious about what does it mean, you know, to prepare for the baby in a Montessori way, and is it about preparing, you know, the environment for the baby, knowing about the baby development, the first stages, the kind of the embryonic stage, you know, just let me know what you do.
You know, I used to teach for a really long time, a 12-week series. And then for a long time, like 18 years, I did this one way. And then I decided I wanted to create my own way of doing pre-birth classes. And we are, as women, if we're pregnant, our bodies are the first environment, the first prepared environment for our child. And so one thing that I also do is, even before someone may get pregnant, I might work with them in a preconception way of preparation for that environment. That's one thing that I sometimes do. As far as the classes are, we do talk a lot about anatomy and physiology and what's happening during births, because I think it is useful. So I have things that I could show them, but a lot of it's experiential. It is practicing. Every class is relaxation. Coming into, for again, the woman's process of what she has found in her life to be supportive, to come into deepening in herself. Because to me, there's nothing like birth to bring us present to the moment. And,
yeah, for sure.
and you know, and we can do whatever we do with it. And to have caregivers, if you're at home or in the hospital, who support that and understand it, is hugely helpful. But whatever those ways are, we do some exploring of that. What helps you? What are some things that you can think of to prepare that environment? How are you preparing your environment now with your unborn baby? And parenting begins when we're pregnant. It doesn't begin when the baby's born. So we can communicate, we can connect to, we could listen to certain music while we practice relaxation in whatever form we do. And then, for example, if we do that, the baby and we are both having an experience that is, we take that to a cellular level, I feel. And if we bring those same, if it's music, for example, or if it's movement in the body, whatever it is, if we bring that into birth, it will not just signal to the mother, but it will to the baby as well, that state of whatever it was that we came into in ourselves. So we practice those things. And also, what I like to call generational aspects of our own being. So I have, you know, when I was pregnant, I had ideas about pregnancy. I had ideas about birth. I had ideas about what mothering was, what all those things were that had come through my generations in my family. So we explore those and we kind of flesh those out a little bit, and then we can see what is true for us. What do we want to take in and use? What is helpful? What is not helpful? And we can begin to write our own story, which can be affirmations. It can be many different things. And I like to work experientially with clay and with painting and with many different things. Another part of it is, you know, when you're pregnant, for if it's a single mother or if there's a father or a partner, we are all having people in our lives who will then comment on our pregnancy. And sometimes it's very even aggressive, you know, people you don't even know will come up and want to feel your belly, or people begin to tell you stories about their birth. Let me tell you about my birth. And usually, many of the times, it's not a positive experience. So to me, you enter into a level of parenting that is that of discernment. Who do I want to be with? Who do I want to who feeds me in that way? I eat food. Who feeds me in that way as a community? And so we can begin to build our community. And that also to me is part of Montessori, because Montessori is such a rich community. And then, you know, aspects of birth, there are still a lot of misunderstandings physiologically about what happens at birth, what the baby is doing, what the mother's doing. And that gets explored as well, because birth is not just about cervix dilation. To me, that's the smallest aspect of what happens. It has to do with how high the baby is, and the baby moving down, and the ways that we can help to our bodies and the baby to get in good alignment and all those things. And then another part of it is, you know, all the stuff if you're going to go to the hospital, what happens with that. And then if we're having a home birth, that's a whole other process where I'm fully involved with, you know, it's just that I'm one of the caregivers through all of that. And then the other thing that happens with, as you mentioned earlier, in pregnancy, we can look at in our home, even how are we going to prepare the environment. So rather than wait until the baby gets here, can we give some thought or find out some ideas or ways that we could prepare the environment? And that it could be the same things that the baby lived in the water, which was dim lights and quiet, and our vibration of our heartbeat and our voices, and you know, kind of that nesting period. We can create that while we're pregnant. We can give thought to it so that it doesn't become, we even for the home birth, if we don't give thought to it, then you're scrambling around to create it. We can bring thought and prepare that environment. So a place for sleeping, a place for feeding of the baby, a place for self-care or the changing of diapers and those kinds of things. And even the ways that in, you know, the childbirth or the pre-birth education classes are one thing. And then I do classes that are more Montessori based on even what might be needed in the home. What does a baby really need? There's so much stuff out there. What does a baby really need? And so I'll give classes on those things, and it can help with the, you know, people have baby registries, and then they'll learn some things, and some things might connect to them, and then they'll put those in for what they want. Sometimes some of those things are, I'm very protective of the symbiotic period, or the 40 days, a sacred time. In my country, it's not a sacred time unless you work towards it, but it is a sacred time. And it's the time of the parent or the parents and the child falling in love. It's the time of hormones coming into more balance. It's the time of resting and recovery, and that's all we should be doing. So to have, during pregnancy, create a way that if we have family and friends, and many people say, how can I help? Have a list. You know, meals delivered for, I like to even have the first 6 weeks. The meals are just brought to the home. And you can have a friend that, there's even websites that can be set up to do this now. And someone else just manages it. And then the food is brought, and it's something the parents don't have to worry about. Shopping, laundry. But the main thing for the family is to be adapting, to be accepting their new life, for the baby to have those points of reference that are some of I mentioned earlier, and for everyone to just get to know each other. And then if we're breastfeeding, that's a whole other journey and time for that as well.
Yeah. And so I was a bit curious, how do you find the parents? Because in my own experience, when I was pregnant, I didn't know anything about Montessori. And what was offered to us as first-time mom was something at the hospital. And what we came across when we look for things that we need for the babies would be like the baby catalog from the main baby shops, the high street baby shops, and obviously nothing about, you know, how to gently welcome the baby. That would be about selling you as much as possible and all those objects that are not useful. So obviously by the time I had my second, I didn't buy a thing nearly. And when I work with parents, I have mainly second-time parents, because for the first time around, if they're not aware of alternative way of education, they discover, you know, gentle parenting, attachment parenting, and Montessori way later. Okay, so they tend to do a different kind of preparation and welcoming the baby differently for the second one. So I'm curious if you have the same kind of experience, or if maybe because you're a doula, obviously you have more clients through that take you as a doula, and then we'll discover another way to welcome the baby, kind of as following that. So I'm just curious about your own experience. If you find it easy to reach first-time mom? Or...
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's one of the reasons I started Ananda Montessori was to have a physical space where people, through teaching childbirth classes all those years, and then being in the midwifery community and the doula community, that I'm known in that way, and I'm known in Montessori. And so people that are pregnant will contact me even with their first babies. I will say, you know, like having the physical space of Ananda, I'm in a storefront, so people are seeing it. But even so, I get sometimes children much later, you know, it might be their second or their third baby, or it could be their first. It comes down a lot of times to word of mouth and what people are hearing. But you know, you hear the same things, I'm sure, that I hear, that when they come in and it's their second baby, they will say, I wish so much that I had known about this for my first, you know, and I wish, yeah. And so I just say, well, you're here now, you're here. So we start from here, and you have one child, you have this child, and so this is where we start, or you're pregnant. So that's so it's been a mix over the years, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think now with social media, more and more parents are more aware of different ways to educate their children. And I'm every time I'm surprised in my main Facebook group by the number of people who don't have children yet, but who works with children, you know, who are teachers, or who are midwives, or who are who work in social services, and they are interested into the Montessori education. So, and they kind of say as well that they kind of want to be prepared for when they will have their own children. So I can see a movement, going towards being more aware, and I think it's probably because of the social media, and it's a good aspect of the social media, I suppose. So another common question that we receive, when we work with very young babies, the first year, the main issue is always about sleep. I don't know if you have that as the main questions, parents being very worried about the sleep, and how to have a healthy sleep routine from the beginning. And also there is this, I don't know if it's a misconception, but this idea that Montessori promotes independence, so children must sleep independently, the little floor bed, and parents can be confused. Do we need to start that from the start? Is it okay to go sleep? Is it okay to have a cot? So, I wanted to discuss a bit with you about sleep, and how do you approach that with parents, and what is your own experience, maybe?
I every morning I read one of Maria Montessori's books, and I was reading just yesterday about sleep. And so Maria was saying that it's interesting, these aren't all her words, but basically it's interesting that with children, we don't recognize usually that they have awareness in themselves of when they're tired. They can go to sleep, and they can awaken during the night, and they can awaken in the morning, and they can rise just as we do as adults. And we complicate things a lot around sleep with children. And what you're saying is so true. There's all these different things. And to me, it's another opportunity to come into our own parenting intuition and our own choices. And also, it's the beginning of, well, even in pregnancy, observation begins, I feel. I kept an observation journal when I was pregnant. But anyway, when we are with our child right after birth, we begin to observe, and we see those cues of the child. So the cues of what are the cues for this child, this person, this human being, when they're becoming tired, or they're becoming hungry, or what is the difference between being tired and maybe I'm just being held so much that I just want some freedom of movement. Those might look similar, but they're really different cues. So beginning to bring ourselves into some observation and knowing of the child. And the other thing I want to say is that I really feel that during pregnancy, I feel all of us as human beings really live in biological time. Industrial time is the time that we created, that is around work, and it's around the clock, and it's around measuring time in that way. But we live in biological time. And, there have been many studies on that and things, but I feel that in pregnancy, I don't know if you remember this, but I just felt that I would, I'm deepening in myself, and a more sensitivity to nature, and to the moon, and to the sun, and to the water, and the earth. And then, people will say, well, when you're pregnant, you become easily confused, and all the blood's going to the uterus. I don't think that's what it is. I think it's that we're entering what I call horticultural time, which is biological time. And we live in that when we're pregnant. And the baby's living in that. And then the baby is born, and the baby's still living in that, and we're still living in that. And if we can rest when we're tired, and if we can rest with our baby, and we're both recovering, all three of us, if we can do that for ourselves and not worry about how long it is, and not do the app thing with timing it, and not worry about a schedule, that will bring us into, again, being able to observe those cues. And I think the symbiotic period that we talk about in Montessori, or the first 40 days, it's that time kind of processing. And babies, when they're born and for many days and weeks, their alert period when they're sleeping is, I think at the beginning, it's maybe 90% of the time. And then they have a deep period of sleep. So why is that? I think it's because we're mammals, and it's a safety mechanism. It's a startle reflex. So the same with the mother. If I'm sleeping with my baby, and if you, I know you know this, but the sleep rhythms, if we are with our baby sleeping in the bed or we're napping with our baby, our sleep rhythms will become connected. They become a web together. And that is living in, kind of surrendering over to that, such a special time in life, where we're in recovery and we're learning each other. So coming back to what Maria Montessori said, I do feel that children have that capacity, babies do. And I feel that, you know, it's really your choice in how you decide to sleep with your child. And I did co-sleep with my children. Looking back on it, I think that probably with both the boys, I could have, they did eventually have a floor bed and did absolutely fine with it. That probably could have started earlier when I look back at it. But we were with them in our bed, and then, but wherever we went, we always had, you know, there's something called a tappuccino.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Okay. So we didn't have the tappuccino, which I can talk about in a moment, but we did have this one quilt that a sweet woman had made me. And she actually taught me to be a weaver. And she made this beautiful quilt, which was about this big. And so wherever we went, we took that with us. And what room we were in, it was on the floor. So if either of the boys fell asleep, they would be just laid on there. And sometimes they would crawl over when they were crawling, and they would just fall asleep there. And then we would just go about our life. We're in the house, and they feel that they belong because that place is there for them. And we're moving it where we are. There's my place. I can go to my place if I'm tired. And then they would just wake up. So even though we did have them in bed for some time, and we were just comfortable with that, we also did this as well. And, you know, many parents, one father in particular that he's so dear to me. He's actually from Italy, and he loves Maria Montessori so much because of, I mean, for Italians, it's quite different, his love for her. But right after their birth, he wanted to know, when will she sleep through the night? And so we sat down and we talked about things we're talking about now, and he began to understand more about the sleep cycles and what was happening, and that he could, rather than expect her to join him in what he wanted for that brief time, I mean, we're tired and exhausted, he could join her where she was. And so rest when she was resting, and he had time off as well. And now she's 9 months old, and she's unless she's teething, she's maybe waking up once, if she wakes up at all during the night. But the pressure is so strong on parents to what do people say when you have a baby? Is he or she sleeping through the night? Well, they better not be. If a baby's sleeping through the night and they're a newborn, that is not good. Because if you're breastfeeding, the breast milk is so easily digested that within an hour to 2 hours, they may need to nurse again. And I don't, as a midwife, I don't feel comfortable, and as a birth attendant, 4 hours is about as much of a stretch that I'm comfortable with. I think that if it was 5 hours, you would want to awaken the baby and just kind of, to see if the baby's too warm. Sometimes we keep babies way too warm, and they they drowse. I mean, it's kind of like if we got too warm and you can't even awaken yourself. It's not dangerous. It's just make them a little cooler. So I don't know if that helps to answer, but I don't, I think that I've seen the floor bed used early on, like as soon as someone's crawling, and it works beautifully. And I've seen people who use a crib, which personally I call a container, as Maria Montessori did, because we can't, how do I get out of that? And it's unsafe, really. And I'm not saying that in any way with judgment, but just as again, a way of preparing the environment. So does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that you say is the cues, being attuned to the cues of the baby. And that's something as a first time I found very difficult. The reason maybe in my case was because I'm an expat. I didn't have any close family nearby, so it was just me and my husband. And, you read the books and everything, but, identifying the cues on your own babies, okay, is she hungry? Is she tired or something else? You don't really know the first months. And if you don't have anybody else with a bit of experience telling you she's hungry or she's tired, then you can misunderstand the cue and like feeding too much or putting her to bed when she's overtired. And I think I did a lot of that the first year, to be very honest, because I couldn't get the cues right, basically. And I remember having my stepmother coming over when my daughter was maybe around 9 months old, and she stayed for 2 weeks. She was with my dad, and she started to say, "Oh, I think she's really tired," and "Oh, I think she's," and she's starting to help me that way. She didn't do it on purpose, but she started to help me to identify the cues. And every time she was saying, "Oh, she does look tired," then I was doing the sleep routine, and that was it. Every time she was falling asleep, and before my stepmother came, I was wrong nearly every time. So she was falling asleep on me or nursing, but never, I couldn't get the cues that she was showing me. So I was always like feeding her because she was crying or something like that, and not because I was clearly attuned to her cues. And so it was very helpful. So I think nowadays, many parents raise children just mom, dad, and the baby, and don't have close family members or experience, parents or grandparents or older sister, or in your case, having a doula who comes for a few visits after birth. You probably help parents as well to kind of get, is she hungry? Is she thirsty? Does she need a nappy change? That may be more obvious, but I think that's maybe something that we are lacking, is to have the support from the village, basically. Right. To help us to identify all those cues. And despite books, I think, having a visual in that case and seeing babies. And I know that somebody was doing like the the language of the baby, like Duncan language. Is it the Duncan language when the lady shows properly the babies? And I discovered that for my second, and I discovered that when I was pregnant. So watching all of that was really life-saving. I felt more able to watch the cues, and I think I was more able to respect my son's rhythm in that sense. So comparing the two of them, with my daughter, we had a lot of issues regarding sleep, because we totally missed how to do that. And also we had, as you said, the pressure, does she sleep through the night? And as a first-time mom, the first 2 years, I was totally lost about that, because she was not sleeping through the night. So I thought I was doing something wrong, obviously. And I was exhausted because I was like waking myself up, trying to put her back into a routine instead of sleeping with her and resisting the co-sleeping, which was working. That was perfectly working, but I was afraid of telling to the nurse that I was sleeping, obviously. And thankfully, I learned about it. I went to a Leche League meeting when she was nearly 2. And so they were super helpful, and that really changed my parenting. And I was already training to be a Montessori teacher, but in the 3 to 6 training, we didn't talk about that at all. So I discovered more the 0 to 3 years old after that, and through more courses after that. But so I was more prepared when I had my son, and I can see the difference in their rhythm and in the way they sleep at night. But I still don't know if it's just a matter of personality or because I didn't I didn't understand the baby sleep for the first time around, basically. So probably didn't do exactly what I would have done if I knew better when she was a baby. So I think the cues is something very important, and I will put a link to that Duncan language, baby language, because that's really, I suppose you're aware of that videos. And I think she said there with the proper DVDs or something, but there with some videos on YouTube that show exactly, how to recognize why the baby is angry, when the baby is angry, when the baby is sleepy, when the baby, is uncomfortable physically for one reason or another. So yeah, I do believe that it's very, important to get to know that. And
the respect of the father or the partner, but especially the woman and the baby, giving them space so that they have their experience, which is not my experience. It is not a midwife's experience. It is not a physician's or a hospital midwife's experience or a nurse. It's the woman's experience. So I, just like a Montessori, I think of it as being an active observer and observing, and we become part of that prepared environment. And so I think it's the same. I was just going to add that, at Ananda, because I started with pregnancy, all of the parents keep an observation journal. So, so with the infants too, there's wherever they are with their child, they're using the observation journal. So that would be where they would be recording those things. And on one half of the observation journal are the what we see. So it's, the objective is if we're a camera and we're writing down what we're seeing. And then I have a line down through the middle of the page, and on the right hand side, they're writing down feelings that are rising up in them or thoughts around what's happening. So both of those things from the beginning, but with infants, they're doing. So that's in a way keeping track of cues, but it's much more in depth, as with the observation journal or a notebook or whatever you want to use. And it can be really helpful. And the other thing I wanted to say, with everything you said, was just so beautiful in your process. And the other part of it, I think, is a learning of when a baby is receptive to being with us. So when they may be looking out the window, there's light and they're seeing that, and they may be looking that's their work. So we begin to understand that we don't interrupt that. Or what happens when we interrupt it? What's going on in us that I feel I have to go join that? But then when they turn and they look at us and make eye contact, that's the invitation from the child for you to be with them. The same as when you and I make contact, there's that invitation for us to connect. So right at the very beginning, that those experiences happen.
Yeah. I think parents are very lucky when they work with you. I can sense that from here. So you talked about the cappuccino a tiny bit, so something that I didn't have either when my children were little, something else that, you know, if you're not training, I think, to be a Montessori teacher, you are not exposed to that until recently, until it started to be, you know, shown on social media. So I think it's more, it's more advertised now. So if you want to explain what it is exactly, and introduce that, introduce the opportunity to parents or not, and as you said, you have used something else. I believe I used something else because I was always wearing my children in a sling, so I used to put the sling. It was not the same purpose, but at least well. So it was always around them in the bed, and you know, just explain what it is, or that help parents maybe.
So the cappuccino is, you can think of it as like a soft blanket, or usually it's kind of quilted, and it's made of natural fabric. It is longer than the infant, and it's wider than the infant. So, you know, if you can, if you've ever done this before in water, if you've ever been held in water and rocked in water, I don't know if you've had that experience as a child, or even when you hold an infant in water and you move them, they feel safe and secure, and they feel comforted. And the cappuccino is a material that can give that continuous connection to the infant. And when we are even pregnant, we can sleep with that as the mother, so that our smell and our scent becomes in that fabric. And then that's another, from the very beginning, whether you're having a home birth or you're birthing in a clinic or a birth center in the hospital, the baby can be put on that. And it's very, you know, when a baby, we've been in water, we've been swimming in water and moving around, and then we're out where there's gravity. So our legs kind of fall, and that can startle us, our arms shoot out. There's that startle reflex, which we want to see in babies. It's a good sign. But if they have, it's even different than the comfort of our arms, although skin to skin is the very first and best thing. But the cappuccino, the baby can lay on it while it's feeding, if it's breastfeeding or bottle feeding. Whoever holds the baby, it can transfer over to that person with that, and there's much less startling in the child when that's used. And then wherever, again, they lie down, that can be the material that they're on. And, you know, I had a family that I was at their birth, and their daughter is almost 20 months old now. And I did work with them about a baby registry and what did they want. And one of the things they wanted was the cappuccino. So, you know, on Etsy, you can get them, or you can get designs to make them if you want to actually have one. And they told me later on, maybe a few months in, we're very good friends too, and they live in my town. And so I was talking with them, and they said of all the things they got for their baby, the cappuccino was the very best thing they got of all the things they received. And that they felt it benefited them so much, even in, you know, how when there might be family and friends and they want to hold the baby, and there can be a feeling of, well, does that person know how to hold the head? And, you know, maybe some worry about that. But when we're on this fabric and we're moved, it actually helps the other person or a child or a sibling to feel better, because they feel that they're holding in a more less worried way. So that's the other benefit that I've witnessed with it. And again, you could use anything that is like that. It could be, you know, sometimes we'll get such sweet quilts or little blankets made from grandparents or friends or whatever. It could be that. But the Tapatino itself, it's kind of like a ellipse shape in a way. And again, it's a little longer and a little wider than the infant.
Yeah, I think if I the possibility that the opportunity, that's something probably that I would offer to a new mom, and reading about it after having my 2 children, definitely something that would have been useful. And yeah, so it's great that it's more well known, and it's one of the essential, basically, that could be very useful for a new parents, because you know there's so much stuff even in the Montessori world that are labeled now as being Montessori, right? So many toys that are labeled Montessori, and obviously there are some, you know, the Montessori mobiles obviously are recommended by Montessori teachers, and you know some of the first toys can be recommended by us as well. But what do you think? What do you think is the most important? Is it necessary to have all of those objects, or maybe not? Just a few toys and just you know, treasure baskets with everyday items will be enough. But because I think there is a bit of I think we were talking about social pressure, you know, but I think the Montessori parenting world, there is also that, yes, ID, and what we see on Instagram. Okay, new parents know they have an Instagram account and they post pictures, and they see other families posting pictures of that beautiful baby mobiles, Montessori mobiles, and they know that they cannot afford it. So we can feel maybe, you know, that our children are missing out because they don't have that. But you know, my children didn't have Montessori mobiles. My second had 2. The one I was able to make myself, and then I stopped because I couldn't do the next one. And you know, I feel that they developed perfectly without the baby mobile, and it was more about not having an overstimulating environment and being selective about what I was giving them than having all the Montessori branded materials, basically. But yeah, if you want to tell me about what you think is more important, what is not necessary, and so on.
Well, I think as you're talking about it, it all has to do with when we come into our parenting. I didn't know with my babies, I didn't know about the Montessori mobiles, so they didn't have those. Although, you know, my mom actually, she taught me a lot really around Montessori, a lot about babies. She would make mobiles and she would hang them above Seth, our first, when he was a baby. And she would just, she had this light and she would just have these things that she would just make. And I saw his concentration, and I saw the ability in this new being to engage with this and even have a conversation with it for maybe 45 minutes. And we would sit and he would be on the table, actually the dining room table, on this quilt, and she would have it on the light. So I saw that, and that was interesting to me. Also, that my mother knew so much more than I knew. And now that I do have the mobiles, I've made a number of the mobiles, I've purchased some, I have them hanging in Ananda above on the wall, just for ease of getting them, but also they're beautiful. What I've noticed with them is with like the Munari, which is the first one, and it's black and white, and so they can begin even days after birth. You could have that mobile. Anything with a child, you would show that to that friend, and if they had interest in it, then it would be there. We never push anything on a child. So with the mobiles, I've had all of them used, and I've had the traditional ones up through, and then I've made some with balls when they begin to kick, so they can kick the ball and it swings, or they can hit it and it swings and moves. I have, they're in a sequence, and so if you do them in sequence and you're aware of it, I do notice that at this time the baby, because they're visually seeing a different color or whatever, that they're more engaged in that. And again, sometimes they'll look at that mobile for 5 minutes, sometimes it's a half hour, sometimes it's 50 minutes. I mean, I'm just observing this. And then there's some that are grasping when they begin to grasp. Those can be made with anything. We have a fishing line and it hangs down. I'm actually in the room right now at my house where Ananda started. And so the hook is still up there on the ceiling from where it hung down, the fishing line, and we just had the mobiles hung on it. And then if I thought of another thing that might be interesting, I hung it on it. And it was just an experiment. And that's, to me, what it is to be with the child. And then, but I'll say this that's so interesting to me is, because my mobiles hang up there, the children that have been with me since they were born, and they did have the mobile experience, and maybe now they're 19 months old or they start walking, they'll come back and they point up to each one, and they'll point, and one of the little boys will say circle for the Gobi mobile, and we'll just point at each one, and I'll just slowly say their names. So whatever it is that the child's experience is of it, I don't know. We don't know what it is. But I do know that they remember. And so, if you have those or you want to make them, you can. It's not that hard. But you can make mobiles out of really anything. And then the early materials, when they start to grasp, natural things are better than, they feel better. So wooden, different textures, those kinds of things. But again, we show a baby, and if they have interest in it, then they may have it. They will take it. You should not just like put it in their hand, but they reach out and take it. And then they may, there's the bell rattle that you can make. There's different things. All of those things my parents made me. I didn't purchase any of those just because they wanted to do it. There's not too much early on that you need. And again, you're observing and you're seeing when those times happen. And then all the other, the Imbikari boxes and the object permanence boxes come with when the child's moving into 7, 8, 9 months of age and begin to notice they're experiencing cause and effect. So there's different materials that we can make during that period. So it's really an opportunity of learning about the development of the natural development of the child during that time. But we don't have to, I think that the problem is that we see the stuff and they're beautiful and we think I have to have those, rather than observing our child and seeing that there's a time now where that sensitive period or their interest is, so we can maybe make that or have that available. So it doesn't come from out here to here, it comes from here and moves out.
Yeah.
If that's helpful.
Yeah, it is. And
Okay.
yeah, it comes to being able to observe our own children. And I think when parents
Right.
have the possibility to come to an infant community like yours or mine, there are more and more communities like that, in different countries, in different cities. And
Mm-hmm.
here in the UK, I think it's starting to grow as well, with more Montessori teachers developing their own play groups and parents and infant community, so parents are more exposed to that and will be able to observe their children and then decide if they really need that extra materials for the home as well. And so it's an important job that we're doing.
Yeah.
So I have two other questions that are more maybe
Sure.
not practical, I don't know. But I wanted to know if you have a book that you would like to recommend for parents about Montessori, especially about the 0 to 3 age group. What is maybe your favorite books that you want to recommend to parents to read?
Well, you know what? You were so helpful with providing me with some questions. And so for the books, I do have a list. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. That's always helpful.
Okay. So for birth, for preparing for birth, there's a book called Birthing from Within, which is by Pam England. Yeah. It's been around for a while. I use it a lot. It's very holistic. It's a lot of the things I talked about is why I do the things I do. There's another book called Mindful Birthing, and it's by a woman named. And
Can you repeat that one?
Sure, it's mindful, so being mindful, birthing. So did you hear the second word? Okay.
Mindful birthing, that was the author that I didn't hear.
Sure. Her name is Nancy, and then it's Bardock. It's
okay.
If you just put in mindful birthing book, it will come up.
Yeah, I will find the link and post it in the comment section for everyone.
And I can send you this too. And then for breastfeeding,
that would be great.
Yeah, for someone that's going to breastfeed, I mean, I was a La Leche League leader for felt like 100 years, but the book that I love right now is called Breastfeeding Made Simple. And it's about natural breastfeeding, which is, you've seen the videos before probably of the baby crawl. So like if a baby's born and the baby's set on the mother's belly, it will crawl up to the nipple.
Yeah.
It can make its journey just like any other mammal. So through the study of that, this natural breastfeeding really movement has started. And this book is about that, and it's a very different way of looking at and understanding how babies physiologically, the cues again that they need to have to breastfeed. So that's called Breastfeeding Made Simple, and her name is Nancy Moore Botcher. And again, I can send you that. So then to Montessori, I really like I do discussion groups with my parents monthly. And the newer book this year, the last year and a half that came out, called Montessori Speaks to Parents. You might have that one.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it's a small book, and we actually spent quite a few months focusing on that in my discussion group. I like that a lot for parents. Understanding the Human Being, which you're familiar with.
As well, yeah.
Yeah, by Silvana Montanaro. The Joyful Child by Susan Miglin Stevenson, which all of my parents received that book when they enroll at Ananda. And then for another one for which I really love, and I think it's one of the best new books for the first year, is Baby's First Year Milestones by Aubrey
Yeah.
Hargis, and you'll be having Aubrey on, and I have that book, and my parents really love it. So that's another one. For the older child, my favorite book is The Montessori Toddler by my dear, dear friend Simone Davies.
And she's on this.
Yeah,
so it was a pleasure to talk to her. Yeah.
Yeah. And then along with that, just any and all Maria Montessori books.
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
And I'm very happy with the list that you have provided, because you have reminded me of a very good book, because I use Buzzing Room Within for both of my children. And when you talked at the beginning of this interview about how you prepare parents, and you talked that you were preparing parents with like clay and visualizing the birth and so on, I remember those exercises from that book. And I remember enjoying that book, tremendously, to prepare myself for the birth of my baby. Because I really didn't want to have an hospital. I had a hospital birth, but I wanted natural birth. And it started because I just terrified of needle. So there was no way that they were going to do an epidural on me. So anesthetic. So I didn't want that. So I prepared myself for the natural birth, which kind of lead me to, breastfeeding and to discover more alternative way to raise children, which was good in the end. But that book was kind of the beginning, basically, for me. So I'm happy that because I didn't keep that book for whatever reason. I didn't keep the book after I had my two. I kind of get rid of some of my pregnancy books, and that one I didn't kept it. So yeah, that's one that I want to come back to it. No. I think that's just so interesting to share with parents. Great. And so my last questions, because we've been, quite long, so I don't want to keep you too long. But I ask everybody on this in this conference, what is your favorite Montessori quote? Because we all like a good Montessori quote, right? So I hope you prepared one for me.
I always feel in myself the best Montessori quote is the one that comes to me, that is brought to me. So again, I was reading this morning from the Maria Montessori, The Secret of Childhood. And this is a very well-known quote, but for today, this is my favorite one. She says, "The adult must find within himself the still unknown error that prevents him from seeing the child as he is. If such a preparation is not made, if the attitudes relative to such a preparation are not acquired, he cannot go further."
Yeah, it's a beautiful quote. Yeah, and it's great to finish the interview with a quote.
It is a wonderful.
So I hope I didn't keep you too long, because we've been chatting for a long time, but it was so interesting for me. So I hope it's super interesting for parents as well here. And obviously I will add all the links to your website down below, because I know that you're starting to offer more online support as well. So we can definitely reach and if parents are interested to be supported by you, and if you have some parents in your area, obviously that's even better. And yeah, so I will post all the links down below. Great.
Okay. Can I add one last thing?
Of course.
Okay. I think one of the links is this course is going to be in session once the conference is happening. So there isn't an opportunity to join this first course of it. But I'm involved with another Montessorian, Andy Luca. This is a course for Montessori teachers. There may be some parents that are Montessori teachers. It's a course called Preparation of the Spirit. And you have the link for that. So even though Andy and I it's a 15-week online course, even though we'll be in the midst of it, you can go to that link and just put your name on the mailing list. You'll be updated for future courses and events if you'd like to.
Yeah, absolutely. I will add that link as well. And
Okay.
definitely, I'm sure we're going to have some Montessori teachers. And it's not always easy for us Montessori teachers to find, complementary teaching courses that will help us in our day-to-day practice. So it's definitely important that you and Luca are doing this course. I'm sure that's going to be an amazing course for sure. Okay, great. Thank you for watching, everyone. And if you have further questions, just post them as comments and I will answer your questions. Thanks.